Beyond the surface, mastering the art of critical thinking. Introduction. Art, on the other hand, has been widely observed and appreciated as an intricate and multifaceted intellectual pursuit, encompassing various aspects of society, spirituality, and intelligence. It is an activity that demands the utilization of creativity, imagination, and intuition, among numerous other human characteristics and abilities. It is argued, with considerable merit, that the underperformance of students in art subjects is not necessarily due to a lack of minimum aptitude, but rather stems from a failure to develop essential skills early on in the educational journey. Scholars contend that education necessitates the cultivation of critical thinking skills in relation to art subjects, and throughout this process, educators should strive to nurture students accordingly. Furthermore, it is asserted that meaningful critical thinking must be interconnected with fundamental values, knowledge, and other significant ideals to effectively enrich intellectual pursuits. It is worthy of introspection that students may often struggle to engage in critical thinking or exhibit inquisitive tendencies if their instructors themselves lack a sufficient level of criticality when addressing the subject matter in the learning environment. Consequently, critical thinking and the exploration of thought-provoking questions across artistic and media platforms are paramount for intellectual growth and development. Presently, critical thinking is most prominently associated with professional fields and institutions such as law, engineering, medicine, and the like. This is primarily because these specialized domains nurture individuals with the highest levels of cognitive aptitude through rigorous training and discipline. Aspiring professionals within these realms are deliberately and purposefully guided towards developing critical thinking skills as a prerequisite for subsequent qualification. It is essential to recognize critical thinking as an essential reflective and systematic thought process that revolves around decisive considerations regarding what to think and, more crucially, how to approach the subject matter. Critical thinkers possess the necessary skills to meticulously analyze, evaluate, interpret, synthesize, and draw logical and well-reasoned inferences. Moreover, they maintain a mental disposition that facilitates thoughtful, skillful, and responsible engagement within the critical thinking process. Truly, the acquisition and application of critical thinking capabilities are indispensable for intellectual gauging and discourse in a multitude of realms. Chapter 1. The Importance of Critical Thinking. This episode is used to explain three types of scientific thinking processes. The third group, which Fermi invites not to seek valuable pieces of information and possible mutual help, is an exact example of the paralogical thinking that is active in false news and in communities' conspiracy theories. The first group represents a scientific working method of the 18th century. Various experts considered isolated issues without coordination or confrontation. The second group, on the contrary, is an example of critical thinking introduced by a posthumous monograph of Carlo L. Golino, and we will learn to recognize and practice it. Clearly, this reasoning process is called critical to mean territory of the spirit where to materialize the edifying, not at once taken for granted outcome. You do not need to know the subject, but it takes pure intelligence, instead, often practical creativity. It is a skill to be drawn upon any other specific discipline, be it literature, science, politics, and so on. Enrico Fermi was not just an extraordinary scientist, but also a great educator. One day, he called his students and split them into three groups and asked this question. You have to estimate the length of the room. You have 3 minutes to tell me your estimate. The students in the first group gave different numbers, none of which was around the correct figure. Among the others, some gave figures higher than the real value and some, instead, lower than that. Fermi summarized, you did not talk to each other to take advantage of mutual knowledge. You failed. The students in the second group combined their estimates by averaging them. To this purpose, the ones who had calculated a higher value than the estimated mean felt the need to explain that a larger-than-life figure had to be avoided, but that one proportional to it had to be indicated. The students who had underestimated, on the contrary, specified that a higher-than-life number had to be set, but that a proportionally smaller figure had to be thought of. So when Fermi compared their average with the actual measurement, he said, "Good, the result is not perfect, but you all approached a quite good estimate." Finally, the ones in the third group were left with the doubt that their companions were wrong and had taken advantage of the debate to draw a better conclusion. In this particular case, Fermi reminded them that even though they had not reached an accurate estimate, the process of critical thinking and collaboration among group members was valuable and could potentially lead to a more informed decision-making process. It highlighted the importance of questioning assumptions, challenging established ideas, and considering different perspectives when engaging in scientific inquiry. By embracing critical thinking, individuals can navigate through complex problems and arrive at more comprehensive and well-rounded solutions. Through this exercise, Fermi not only taught his students about the different types of scientific thinking, but also instilled in them the significance of embracing critical thinking as a valuable tool in their future endeavors. As the students reflected on their experiences, they recognized the power of collaboration, the potential limitations of individual estimations, and the importance of combining diverse perspectives to nurture innovative and accurate outcomes. As they moved forward in their scientific journeys, they would continue to apply these valuable lessons, contributing to the advancement of knowledge and the betterment of society as a whole. Fermi's teaching methods resonated deeply with his students, and their grasp of the subject matter grew exponentially. The room buzzed with excitement as they realized the impact of critical thinking in shaping their understanding of various disciplines. They saw how it could transcend boundaries and bridge the gaps between seemingly unrelated fields, fostering a holistic approach to problem solving. Fermi's lesson had ignited a fire within them, driving them to explore and question with renewed fervor. They yearned for a deeper understanding of the world and eagerly sought opportunities to apply their newfound knowledge. This experience served as a catalyst for their intellectual growth, propelling them on a path of continuous learning and discovery. The significance of collaboration became evident as they witnessed the power of collective wisdom and the ability to create synergistic solutions. They understood that the collective intelligence of a diverse group far surpassed the capabilities of an individual mind alone. The lessons learned from Fermi's thought-provoking exercise echoed in their minds long after the class had ended. They embraced uncertainty, relishing the challenges it presented and perceiving them as avenues for growth. They learned to question not only the information presented, but also their own biases and preconceived notions. With each step forward, they developed a keener sense of discernment, honing their critical thinking skills and enabling them to make well-informed decisions. As they embarked on their respective scientific journeys, they carried with them the spirit of exploration and unwavering curiosity instilled by Fermi. They aspired to unravel the mysteries of the universe, armed with the tools of critical thinking and collaboration. Their goal was not merely to acquire knowledge, but to contribute meaningfully to the body of scientific understanding. They recognized that scientific thinking was not confined to laboratories and academic settings alone, but permeated all aspects of life. It guided their interactions, informing their perspectives, and shaping their worldview. With each passing day, they inched closer to unraveling the intricate tapestry of existence, driven by a thirst for knowledge and a passion for discovery. As they continued to navigate the path blazed by Fermi, their contributions would leave an indelible mark on the annals of science, enriching the lives of future generations and ushering in a new era of enlightenment. Chapter 2. Understanding Critical Thinking. Critical thinking has attracted significant attention in today's society due to its fundamental role in all aspects of learning. Educators and scholars have recognized that many learning difficulties arise from students' lack of proficiency in thinking methods. Over the past 70 years, the concept of critical thinking has gained popularity, with prominent pedagogues exploring the best approaches to teaching this skill. The central idea behind their efforts is that education should prioritize individuals who can think critically, creatively, and independently. As a result, humanist pedagogues have dedicated their research to developing methods that enhance the intellectual activity of high school students and its impact on the development of critical thinking. In the present day, people are expected to possess more than just the ability to process information and acquire knowledge in a specific subject. A mere grasp of techniques and methods is no longer sufficient. It is now essential to understand their essence deeply, allowing for creative articulation, transformation, and application in solving complex and unprecedented problems. Achieving such a high level of mastery requires critical thinking. Consequently, learning to think critically has become a necessity alongside accumulating knowledge. A robust foundation in critical thinking will not only determine a person's intellectual level, but also their potential for growth and success. Some scholars emphasize the importance of dialogue in critical thinking, particularly when put into practice. In the early 1990s, Pierce delved into individual oriented conceptions of critical thinking. He argued that a normatively informed model of an individual engaged in inquiry is necessary for understanding emergence in science. Pierce echoed Locke's suggestion that one needs a friend when their capacity to generate new hypotheses and concepts reaches its inner limit. Building upon this, Schroeder and Shankar popularized Pierce's discussions on linguistics. Later, Park contended that individuals develop normatively dependent critical thinking by learning to adopt dialogue as a model for reflective practice. This led to the creation of extensive teaching philosophies, such as using Socratic questioning in scientific practice, following the footsteps of William Kirkpatrick, William Gibbons, Jane Watson, and Mary Field Belenky. Nancy Murphy contributes to the relational approach to critical thinking through her work on a critical thinking course. In this course, the examination of truth claims required a form of critical thinking that prompted students to engage in dialogue with primary texts. Murphy noted that the material produced by her students was not solely a result of their independent critical thinking, but rather a product of the specific model of critical thinking employed in the class. Additionally, the students learned how to engage in dialogue with individuals from their own traditions, avoiding dismissing them as gullible or uninformed. Understanding the crucial role critical thinking plays in academic and professional life, it becomes imperative to explore its essence. Critical thinking, in its simplest terms, is reasonable, trustworthy, rational, and unbiased thinking. Although commonly considered an individual process when analyzing a phenomenon, critical thinking can extend beyond this notion. Sayes argues that critical thinkers are proactive learners who consider multiple perspectives, demonstrate flexibility in their thinking, synthesize and transfer knowledge to new contexts, reflect on their own learning, and effectively communicate with others. Ennis adds that a critical thinker is open-minded, capable of identifying and evaluating relevant reasons and alternatives, and able to choose and defend the most reasonable choices. Reichenbach suggests that a critical thinker is inquisitive, adaptable, empathetic, and confident. Coleman contends that a critical thinker generates and asks questions, thinks independently, applies analytical reasoning, exhibits skepticism rather than impulsiveness, displays fairness, identifies and evaluates different kinds of reasons, draws conclusions, and reflects on their own reasoning. Hamada proposes that critical thinkers excel in viewing things from others' perspectives, show respect, humility, independence, fairness, and assertiveness. Combining these perspectives, critical thinkers are inquisitive, open-minded, honest, aware of their biases, and possess an independent and confident mindset that permeates every aspect of their lives. One significant benefit of critical thinking is that it nurtures learners who become less reliant on teachers for knowledge. This alleviates the immense pressure on educators to cover vast amounts of content. The characteristics of a critical thinker may vary depending on the context, but experts have identified consistent traits. Fisher suggests that a critical thinker is inherently questioning, technologically adept, inquisitive, capable of transitioning systematically between multiple interpretations, and meets the criteria set by the specific context. They communicate effectively by presenting arguments and evidence, both for and against a given topic, and through the use of statistical data and contrasting examples, they promote expert judgment. Furthermore, critical thinkers display empirical reasoning, cogently transfer and associate knowledge, expand their intellectual horizons, and adhere to logical norms. Michael, on the other hand, emphasizes that critical thinkers are honest, inquisitive, adaptable, confident, fair minded, and empathetic. As critical thinking continues to be recognized as an essential skill, individuals must embrace its principles and cultivate its traits in order to excel in their personal, academic, and professional endeavors. Chapter 3: The Process of Critical Thinking. Once cognitive equilibrium is disrupted, we move to the second stage of self-directed continuous learning, which I refer to as inquiry. As Monty Neal of the National Center for Fair and Open Testing suggests, good questions are the beginning of good thinking. To bridge the gap between old and new knowledge, learners work to find some sense of stability and certainty. Curiosity drives learners to generate numerous questions to clarify the gap that disrupts their cognitive equilibrium. After generating a set of questions, learners move to the investigation stage and search for answers to their questions. Inquiry and investigation stages trust in self-directed inquiry and investigation. When cognitive equilibrium is disrupted, you generally begin to look for an answer, a sense of stability that can give you a return to your comfortable learning zone. The challenge here is trying to find a solution quickly to attain that stability without applying enough effort and time leads to more harm than good for deep understanding. Based on numerous theories and frameworks, I created the following four-stage process of critical thinking: cognitive disequilibrium, inquiry, investigation, and individual conclusion. This framework is formed using the works of Richard Paul and Linda Elder, who described several stages of the critical thinking process in detail through questioning phases of Socrates and many other scholars. The process begins by disrupting existing knowledge and instigating awareness of cognitive disequilibrium. This arises from the interaction between new knowledge and pre-existing knowledge stored in the brain. When new knowledge is not in line with pre-existing knowledge, it generates an uncomfortable gap between the two. At this conceptual gap, cognitive dissonance is experienced. In this phase of critical thinking, our awareness of conceptual discomfort is also raised. One of the things that employers, or when you have an organization, would expect from you is to be able to recognize assumptions. Through my experience as an employee and when I conducted this training program with the fresh grads of the organization, they should come in and be able to recognize how assumptions influence your thinking and reasoning. In other words, what happens is when they come in and the employer gives them an assumption, fresh grads should be able to recognize the assumption and evaluate it. Always remember this because, as I mentioned before, thinking has a purpose, so the assumptions of the purpose determine how we handle the books. So in recognizing the assumptions, you should realize that all thinking is based on seeing the question from a certain perspective. There are always some questions in view. The assumptions are questions. In seeing the problem, you have to see the questions that direct the thought for that purpose, as well as how the questions influence their answers. Critical thinking does not end in identifying bad arguments and flawed reasoning. More important is the ability to spot the assumptions that underlie flawed arguments. In critical thinking, assumptions are what employers expect from fresh college or university graduates. For example, when you are completing tasks in the organization, you hope that the fresh grads brought into your organization would accept the assumptions given to them. You do not expect them to come into your organization and start asking, "Why are the assumptions like this?" So, organizations expect their employees to be able to accept and recognize assumptions. This is an aspect of critical thinking that is more practical and relevant to employers than other aspects, such as determining fact from opinion, explanation, or the too important, as of critical thinking, inference, and issue. Critical thinking requires identifying and evaluating arguments. This is especially important in this age of misinformation and fake news. By becoming more politically aware and knowledgeable of the current problems, the society will evolve into a society that is more critical than one is critical. The society will only think. The importance of this will manifest itself in the society's opinions and in the decisions it makes. Post-truth will lose its charm. Recent discussions were made about whether the United States would have made the same decision about staying in UNESCO after World War II. The consensus was that the United States would not have made the same decision as then. It was a time when the whole world was in this trap of peace and democracy. This is just a theory and it can be debated, but it is a reminder of what we can achieve if we approach the problem properly. I do mine, do you? Evaluating arguments is an essential step in the process of coming to a conclusion. After we establish that arguers are supporting their own conclusions with premises, the next thing we need to do is to evaluate these arguments. While evaluating an argument, several criteria should be considered. For this reason, while evaluating an argument, the arguer must first restate it in a way that exposes its structure. Then he or she should determine whether the argument is valid or not and finally decide whether an argument is of the kind where using inductive reasoning to ensure their conclusion that yields a line of reasoning whose truth guarantees the truth of the argument's conclusion. Reflecting on thinking helps people not only to think, but to communicate better. Indirectly, it helps people to understand each other. For example, when students learn to build support for their ideas, they have to identify the best reasons for their conclusions. And here's where it's good to make sure students are taught the concept of a fallacy, a flawed argument that leads to an invalid conclusion. Different misleading forms could in fact be used on them. Arguments from authority can easily be overcome by questioning the background or qualifications of the authority. Non-logic-based reasons, like emotional or empathy-based appeals or stereotyping others, don't count as valid arguments. It's to our advantage to develop a culture that doesn't rely on incomplete or inaccurate information if we want our classmates to support our ideas. With the culture of thinking and SFTE strategies, all our students will not only reason with purpose and question well, but also evaluate information critically, and reduce the number of people who spread ideas that lack in good reasoning. Teaching students to analyze information critically is another reasoning skill of critical thinking, and here's where you can use your beloved probes again. Help students question and evaluate sources before embracing ideas. Do the people who offer an idea have their own best interests in promoting their idea? Standards of evidence are another concept that helps people evaluate information. Should they automatically believe the information they get? Or is the source reliable? Are there data and facts behind the information, or is it an unsupported opinion? Collateral learning is a common term in science education where knowledge learned in science classes transfers to the outside world. It's also a common phenomenon in critical thinking instruction. When we help students apply reason to the internet and TV, they will likewise apply reason to their personal lives. They will question sources, evaluate evidence, and analyze information critically, leading to a more informed and thoughtful society. Chapter 4. Developing Critical Thinking Skills. Oh, so what can you actually do to develop this trainable skill? A lot. Let's start at the beginning. In Buenos Aires, 50 students in university were given a critical thinking intervention for 3.5 months. Later, the group was compared to a group that also received a History of Ideas course, but no thinking intervention. The critical thinking group had both better scores on a test, as well as basically instant improved performance on reading and writing. School may be out, but we can still take a few tricks from the laboratory. You don't need a classroom to boost your critical thinking skills. The U.S. Department of Labor has assigned a bunch of tasks critical thinking qualities. Right from your desk in the lab or in the field, make an effort to develop these abilities. You can also use a simpler, yet effective intervention. Another experiment in Ontario gave their group of university students a pile of cards with ways in which they could approach problems and tasks. The students were reminded to look at these cards in the 3 weeks before an important exam. The study showed that in a mere 3 weeks, the card intervention students had more improvements than the unlucky students who were not given this reminder. Critical thinkers approach everything they do rationally and systematically. They don't quickly jump to conclusions, and they ask a lot of questions about the stuff they hear from other people in order to figure out what's really true. Why all this bother? Research done in Abu Dhabi and Canada, published in the National Research University Higher School of Economics, showed that when managers practice critical thinking, they make better decisions, especially in complex or high-pressure situations. In another experiment in Glasgow, people trained in critical thinking predicted the outcome of broader business decisions, like mergers and IPOs, more accurately than people who weren't trained. Clearly, the ROI of critical thinking is real and significant. Developing critical thinkers implies understanding the myths and barriers that prevent the development of critical thinking, including acceptance of everyday reasoning, ethnocentrism, resistance to change, stereotyping, single causality, and rationalizations, along with strategies to overcome these barriers. Academic as well as lived experiences impact our understandings, knowledge, and values in daily decision making. Our experiences shape the way we see the world and educate our students. As such, it is important for us to think about the filters with which we see the world and the messages we send to our students. Daniels, 1996, identifies one such barrier as including the acceptance of the everyday reasoning style. This tendency to simply accept the conclusions and reasoning put forth by others often arises from the over-reliance on strategies such as "it stands to reason" or "trust me." My mission in life is not merely to survive, but to thrive, and do so with some passion, some compassion, some humor, and some style. Dr. Maya Angelou. As educators, our mission is twofold: to teach students how to survive in this competitive world, and to teach them the skills necessary to thrive and survive with passion, compassion, humor, and style. According to Paul, Elder, and Bartel, 1997, critical thinkers pose the following 5 questions. What are the issues and conclusions? What are the reasons? Which words or phrases are ambiguous? Which statements are vague? What are viable alternative viewpoints? In posing such questions, students will be in a better position to question and analyze information they encounter. Without this point of view, learners will never think about alternative ways and more iterative ways to solve problems. Children seeking to reach understanding and decision-making will dissolve their disputes with their friends or others if one side is not able to show other perceptions. In seeking multiple perspectives, one group seeks through informal education to enrich the experiences of our students with various alternative new ideas. Critical thinking requires an imaginative point of view, a look outside everyday perceptions to seek to understand a variety of perspectives. Analysis of alternative concepts, insights, and interpretations are enabled. Seeking multiple perspectives is a critical thinking domain that seeks to foster students' creativity and alternative ways of thinking. The formal definition is to recognize a variety of perspectives related to an issue. Most problems arise from our view of what our world, our universe, is all about. To see things from our lives other than ourselves is indeed worthwhile, for beyond our own surroundings of our own personal lives, what on this planet do we all call home? The monk I met in the woods, Sentry ELMURDOC Gage-born, 1956 York, England. Look at this situation from a different point of view, and you may figure out the reasons that we have a disagreement aren't fact-based, but are perceptual. Israel more ave or a bias is a prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group of people in comparison with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. As we all know, news outlets, social media, politics, familial and personal experiences, etc., and those within them, are chiefly prone to being biased when advancing their particular claims. But we must ask ourselves, what's the benefit of removing a particular bias from our thought processes? The sole act of making decisions, including arguments, with no regard to any bias is close to impossible if you consider the concept of the honeymoon effect. Researchers have found that our brain's decision-making processes are influenced by an internal emotional point of view, wishes, expectations, emotions, etc., that may pave the way for biases and fallacies, since no simplicity would be needed otherwise. A well educated person is someone who can listen to a point of view, understand its validity, perhaps empathize with it, and finally state why they believe what they do. They realize that they have their own personal frame of reference and that they may miss distanced or unbiased vantage points. The Swiss philosopher and psychologist Jean Piaget once said, "The principal goal of education is to create men and women who are capable of doing new things, not simply repeating what other generations have done." To reach that ideal, cultivating and nurturing our cognitive faculties is of the utmost importance. As we have seen so far, critical thinking is not only about asking open minded questions, it also consists of identifying authors' perspectives and underlying assumptions, as well as finding sources of evidence. Being able to identify instances of biased thinking and logical fallacies is also critical, as the reasons provided in a given argument may not necessarily be plausible. Critical thinking involves expanding our understanding of the world and being willing to challenge our own beliefs and preconceived notions. By cultivating these skills, we can become better decision makers and problem solvers in both our personal and professional lives. Chapter 5: Overcoming Barriers to Critical Thinking. The first barrier to thinking critically is egocentrism. Arrogant people always subject their own egos over anyone else's comfort, and everyone has it. They trust their own thinking models so highly and feel very confident about what they are thinking. Not only do they not believe in what they think, they do believe that their thoughts are supreme compared to others. The belief that what they strongly think is correct is a huge barrier in understanding other people and understanding their own thoughts. The second barrier, which is related to the first one, is sociocentrism. Like egocentrism, it holds a connection to the way humans think their thoughts are better compared to anyone else's. Nonetheless, it has somewhat different focus. While egocentrism focuses on self centric opinions and resistances toward others' thoughts, sociocentrism emphasizes self centric opinions that emerge based on the influence of others as part of society in the thinking process. At some point, creativity is as important as critical thinking. It is in creating and innovating that we express critical thinking and development of society. However, we may not have safe mobility and transportation, and our surface skills help us to unlock problems beyond technical barriers. Ideally, we can think both critically and creatively. But first, we do need to overcome some barriers to critical thinking. Humans could be considered as lazy creatures. We may avoid efforts in processing information too much and tend to rely on our existing patterns of thinking in our brain, particularly in our interactions with some other humans. Emotions have a crucial and indispensable role to play in our everyday reasoning. They guide us sometimes, even when we are not aware of it, by lending unexposed or unnoticed stimulus to our thought processes. Biases have been documented and can have detrimental consequences in clinical judgments, research, decision making, and even while sharing information. Research findings reflect this argument, as primary care providers often make erroneous diagnoses under the influence of recency bias. In 1977, Jonathan Street B.T. Evans was one of the first psychologists to report a type of cognitive bias, which later came to be known as the conjunction fallacy. The conjunction fallacy can be described as a situation wherein individuals gauge the probability of a combination of two occurrences to be higher than the probability for a particular outcome alone. The concept of cognitive bias or distortion encompasses the various psychological phenomena in which people make decisions in definite systematic ways that are considered to be illogical and irrational. Some authorities, such as Robert Zajonc and George Lowenstein, prefer the term hot cognition to delineate mental operations that are influenced by personal preferences and emotions. Biases are an aspect of our daily life because, as individuals grow up in a certain culture and environment, their perceptions inevitably become colored, and in the process, biases are developed. Some of the rules and routines in our daily life and our inclination to adopt a particular perspective on an issue, even without evaluating it objectively at times, hints at the biased way we perceive things. This reasoning also accommodates for why we are more sensitive to the sheer number of confirmatory cases than we are to the number of disconfirming ones. We simply take the former and give them more heed. A series of experiments by Robert Mignault et al. Give certitude to all these psychological tendencies. Through a series of 20 years, Mignault et al. Showed that when participants interacted in court conditions where there was no punishment for the information search phase, but for the decision-making one, they modified the information when in the search process and succeeded in bringing it closer to the outcome. This is important because, as even elementary reasoning will tell us, the information itself, when handled honestly, should be designed in such a way that a positive informational outcome should be as reflectively relevant as the negative informational outcome. These patterns, however, clearly seem to indicate that the reflection may lord over its opposite, all other things being completely equal. The first psychological tendency that plagues critical thinking is known as the confirmation bias. Let us briefly consider what cognitive psychologists have discovered about our proclivities in this regard. There are three stages to any intellectual process: information production, information search, and information interpretation. When we focus on one of these stages, we tend to broaden our influences in such a way that we believe through the process of self-destruction without our knowledge, and thus confirm our original assumptions. In other words, we use our intellectual firepower to convert information in a way that sustains our beliefs, as opposed to using them to reform our beliefs. According to Ross and colleagues' seminal research, this is chiefly because we devote our attention to those attributes of a proposition that confirm our beliefs in pessimistic semantics. Among other things, this allows us to remember the information according to the value of the characteristics with which we relate the proposition in the first place. The social pressures in a highly cohesive group to maintain like-minded associations are omnipresent. The highest influence is determined by two factors. The first of them is the insulation of a decision-making group that acts under conditions of perceived threat, regardless of whether this threat is real or merely perceived. The theory is frequently applied to the decision-making process in the direction of political actions. The members of cohesive groups that feel threatened are more effective in limiting dissent to a specific direction and result in ignoring the low-probability negative consequences of alternative courses of action. Group cohesion will produce biased tunnel vision and can also make the persons belonging to such groups lose the capacity for effective and critical appraisal. Two factors have been proposed to determine groupthink. The next figure details the criterion from Janus, 1972. The first one is the makeup or composition of the group. Heterogeneity of the members' social backgrounds appears to restrain groupthink. So, low heterogeneity will determine the groups that are more in danger, such as small groups and cohesive ones. These last will produce strong group pressure, the second component that influences groupthink. Groupthink occurs when, due to the desire for harmony and cohesion in the group, the entire group makes poor decisions. The group members are so afraid to create discord that, even though they may personally disagree with the decision made, they will not express those opinions or concerns. So instead of making the best decision, the group will opt for having a harmonious environment, even at the cost of making a worse decision. Chapter 6. Applying Critical Thinking in Everyday Life. Why do patient nurses manage to survive during a crisis better than nurses who presume they already know how to decipher another's pathology correctly without enough information? The capacity to acknowledge that one has to learn is essential because everyone, even experts in a particular domain, always can learn. The process of critical thought is never final. Although this leads to some disquiet in accepting his limits initially, which can create certain psychological discomfort, an inquiry that is rooted in rigorous self-critique can only expedite learning so that this would be minimized if the appropriate habits of action and assertive reflection on the part of the inquirer are in place. So, as an example from a consideration of more mundane everyday life, the critical thinking model is put to use to come to a solution to a problem. Why is critical thinking important? It is not just that some people learn more effectively when teaching others. That is why all of the above models of critical thinking should be blended and used at the appropriate time according to the context and an assessment of the tasks to be solved. It is also that critical thinking should be applied beyond the academic context, in everyday life. It should not be restricted to the formal educational context. Not lightly so. Whenever we find ourselves involved in a two-person thinking process, it manifests critical thought. It is obvious that whoever we distinctively regard as being our equal intellectually will simultaneously regard us the same way. Otherwise, we will soon label the person not as much our intellectual equal as a willing subservient. This is because critical thinking arises at the same time that people attain a distinct respect that is consonant with the principle of interconnected minds. Decision making frequently happens rapidly and therefore automatically, without direct practical engagement in deliberations or evaluation processes, despite the sheer ponderousness of particularly important and intricate choices. This implies that, though useful to all individuals as evolutionary adaptations, automatically generated decisions under certain predispositions determined by the stimulus may result in minor/major maladies and conflicts, rendering one inefficient at overcoming a scenario that gives solid proof that decisive thoughts, a vital constituent of critical thinking, helps the psychological condition by straining the weight of automated decisions. It will probably aid the thinking process and may raise the growth of the theoretical part for decision-making in total. Decision-making is undoubtedly one of the most significant, enduring, and demanding aspects of our existence. A significant portion of our life consists of making choices. More often than not, it is these choices and not the outcomes of these choices that define the quality of one's life. Truly, rational choices can be compared to the stars in the sky. They are infinite. A microcosm of human decisions would emphasize this principle. From choosing political candidates to purchasing items, deciding about a medical treatment, or obtaining information, decision-making in its diverse forms remains the gatekeeper of the diplomatic, economic, legal, and social realms. As an ever-pervasive activity, decision-making has a considerable impact upon individual and corporate welfare, economic growth, progress, but equally detrimental influence upon nature's resources, trust in governments, and collective identities. In addition, ever since the development of various machine nations almost half a century ago, psychological literature has warned about apparent biases manipulating randomness, probabilities, and the freedom of choice. Critical thinking and problem solving are intertwined. In the Miniature Guide to Critical Thinking Concepts and Tools explain, we cannot really think critically about a problem we cannot analytically solve within a whole complex system. And we cannot really solve a problem we cannot critically think our way through. The two are linked. Thinking requires the use of generalized concepts in a generalized manner. That's how we can use what we know about things to creatively solve our problem. Problem solving is one of the most coveted skills employers are looking for in the current job market. This is because the world is full of problems. We see it in newspapers and magazines. We hear it from friends. Politicians discuss them. Everyone is crying for help. So a person who can proactively identify, analyze, and solve problems is in great demand. Educating yourself in the realms of critical thinking will not only allow you to see the world more clearly, but it will also teach you how to solve these problems. The good news is, regardless of the specific subject, the theory as to logical excellence and problem solving are generalized such that one who masters them will be able to figure out how to solve problems of any sort. The solution is not to have a few monolithic solutions, but rather to have multiple ideas explored in smaller steps. A better approach is to think in terms of multi-layer leadership, where the leaders would create an environment where different agents are processing information in parallel and constantly expanding the number of views they consider. This is achieved with effective communication and open-mindedness that can be acquired with self-awareness, effective critical thinking abilities, and an appreciation for the diversity of viewpoints within the leadership teams. With effective communication, leaders stimulate continual learning, the growth of new ideas, and in the process improve the problem-solving abilities. New insights from corporate or nonprofit leadership, decision makers in society, and even the general public within the organization. Leaders will enable collective actions, fueled partially by technology, collaboration, and decentralization, to achieve more beneficial effects. Regardless of how skilled we are at problem solving, our daily life is full of ordinary and crucial recurring problems that we need to navigate, and this chapter offers a much needed guide to develop critical thinking skills. Policymakers and leaders in organizations are in the best position to transform their societies and organizations, as they have the greatest control over resources, information, and the security of their jobs or positions. They have the power and responsibility to bring about sustainable and positive outcomes. Yet the decisions they make often fail to do so for many reasons. Some of these challenges exist because of the existing leadership philosophies. They often believe in massive actions, scalable solutions, but often such strategies over-rely on top-down solutions from central actors with large reach and a tendency to act by command rather than receiving helpful input and engaged attention from lower actors. In such cases, the resulting solutions may be suboptimal, as they fail to capture the multifaceted nature of problems and the diverse perspectives that can contribute to effective and innovative solutions. To truly address the complex challenges we face, it is important for leaders to embrace critical thinking and problem-solving skills that allow for a more inclusive and holistic approach. By valuing different viewpoints, encouraging collaboration, and fostering a culture of learning and innovation, leaders can navigate the complexities of decision-making with greater insight and effectiveness, ultimately leading to more positive and sustainable outcomes for individuals, organizations, and society as a whole. Chapter 7. Critical Thinking in the Workplace. Critical thinking in the workplace involves dealing with complex areas and grasping significant issues. Be open to new ideas while maintaining the capacity to see all of them. Negative practical consequences of dogma-driven naive realism. The belief that we perceive the world as it really is can be seen, for example, by companies choosing leaders used to acting in a particular way. But leaders who are rational, motivated to the general interest, and able to think more thanks to a broad range of education can make considerations ranging from geopolitics through research and development to management of human resources, independent of the themes and slash or problems of probability involved in decision issues involving information under uncertainty, working towards quotas serving not only companies but also society. Infinite pleasure, then, through the pursuit of truth, precision, and rigor. A path out of that attitude that Descartes brushed in his rules for the direction of the mind, where it is rare that among us a man of quality does not leave the room from another one of our conversation a little embarrassed. These days everyone, in any field, needs critical thinking abilities to recognize and untangle errors in thought, presuppositions, and hidden assumptions. In addition to being clear, on target, and logical, a critical thinker engages issues courageously, thoroughly, and imaginatively, recognizing the ways they are rooted in daily life, religious belief, politics, business, and the like. Plus, the critical thinker continually demonstrates intellectual empathy, pursuing the truth, especially in fields reshaping the world, without putting wisdom aside. Employers are desperate for people, not just to carry out mechanical tasks, but to overcome common reaction, resistance, motivated by uncertainty or surprise, novelty or complexity, concepts foreign to those already used, the spotlight of differing ideas, broad areas on their own where hiring and employee training are concerned. Workforce means vital differences. There are times when management should evaluate its pricing strategies, which may be influenced by, and at times influencing, the markets in which they compete. These assessment times are occasioned by events such as significant revenue growth, marked change in the firm's economic landscape, dramatic change in the company's competitive posture in and existing in such analyses. The analytical problem-solving process should be used at the beginning, middle, and end of any strategic business cycle. First, because organizations today seldom have a clear understanding of industries within which they are functioning. Strategic decision makers are not necessarily those who are intimately aware of the company's market and can frame strategic problems or opportunities. Critical thinkers, those who are thinking like economists, commercial or industrial representatives, confer with the political or the bureaucratically driven competition policy analysts, economic politicians. In the process of strategic environmental data assessment and value of cost benefit change analysis, they are able to identify not only the strategic frames, but also the players who possess implicit knowledge of best strategies in existing industrial structures, identifying and embracing the economic, political, and social governing the landscape. A company's competitive strategy has a major impact on its financial health. Competing to maintain a competitive advantage is a formidable challenge for an organization today. However, managers must develop a basic practical understanding of how their economic organization and the industries in which they compete ultimately make money. In the jargon of strategic planners, any company's competitive strategic options include such generic alternatives as be the low-cost producer, be close to the customer, be the first to market, differentiate your product in some way, and so forth. By examining assumptions and experiences, scanning environments for relevant data, and testing strategic alternatives under development, a critical thinker is able to separate probability from possibility and truth from fiction. 5 questions that will help you think like an economist are: what is the company's relevant economic, political, and social shared experiences governing competition in this business? How forcing or benign are the production and selection challenges which competition in this business landscape? How magnified is the yield and long-term return perception of business practices and policies? Are key data biased, assumed, or valid? What is the economic landscape? We can start by observing a few major considerations. The most important issue is deciding what data to collect or search for in order to obtain an objective, evidence-based answer to the issue of interest. This is the stage where the invention of convenient data and creative, usually linear, occasionally nonlinear, data manipulation enter into the process of statistical data management as statistical methods. Of course, conclusions derived from the use of inappropriate data based on incorrect assumptions and the mistaken significance put into them can be misleading or just not make any sense at all. In order to limit these inconclusive scenarios, the retrieval and collection of data shall be driven by the use of codified scientific protocols, guidelines, and best practices. After the data is collected, we should check it to confirm that the retrieval protocols and guidelines have been carried out and repair, correct, delete, or investigate their methodology in order to identify the reasons behind them being used improperly. The topic of evaluating data and statistics is an extremely large and complex one, and its various aspects can be approached in many different ways. It is, in fact, possible to devote an entire book to each of these aspects. Evaluating examples in case studies, truth and lies in reporting statistics, data and statistics for sound ecological management, and everyday uses of mathematics. Here, however, the intention is to provide an overview of the topic by examining a selection of different issues from several different perspectives. This is necessary in order to produce a general survey that is not confined to specific detail, and that can provide an initial insight that can be developed more fully by the reader. Taking a moment and asking the right questions before making a decision can save much strife in the future. Every decision requires plenty of detailed thought. Rate individual factors of any topic in question. By keeping this list in mind, you will always have a guide with which to process decisions and solve problems. In order to develop good critical thinking skills, we have included a problem set involving research where you discuss issues by comparing and contrasting, questioning assumptions, interpreting and testing one another's ideas, and come to well-thought-out conclusions. Writing an in-depth critical thinking and information search involves developing an appropriate hypothesis, comparing with the findings from your search, comparing these results with your hypothesis, and coming up with good conclusions expressed in a comprehensive written paper or oral presentation that demonstrates the depth of your critical thinking. Weighing the pros and cons of a decision can be time consuming, but it is a crucial part of the process of decision making. Writing a T chart is a good way to carefully weigh both the positives and negatives. On one side, list benefits. On the other, list possible negative aspects. Find the middle ground and analyze its long-term effect. Use an advantages and disadvantages grid to help in considering both positive and negative aspects thoroughly and fairly. Use enumerated options grid to help organize the options in a more precise and organized manner. This can be important/helpful in thinking through decisions where many options are present. Increase in cognitive skills and critical thinking can be achieved through practicing active reading, writing, and engaging in discussions on important topics. By challenging your own beliefs and biases, seeking out different perspectives, and analyzing information critically, you can develop a more well-rounded understanding of complex issues and make more informed decisions. Chapter 8. Critical Thinking in Education. Contemporaneously with philosophy, what is known as critical thinking is revealed in education. Critical comes from the ancient French critic and is derived from the word criticism, meaning the art of analyzing and judging qualities and errors. In Romania, reflecting on thoughts and learning the concrete meaning of events has resulted in continual amendments. This learning is the result of specific teaching in school. In this sense, critical thinking is a necessary condition which facilitates the carrying on of the educational act, can be found in the lessons of nature and the mathematical sciences or in those of literature, philosophy, etc. The whole didactic process aims at strengthening and optimizing the skill of the human personality, by virtue of which it distinguishes and limits its place in the social human community. Considering all the above, we assume that the masters of educational science, many of them have understood, beyond the surface of the concepts, the practical implementation of critical thinking. Critical thinking has been a matter of interest and research in philosophy and religion since ancient times. Although this term may be specific in contemporary education, the ideas and conceptions must be more than 2,000 years old. The ancient history of philosophy demonstrates the importance of a specific way of reasoning. After the Greek philosophers, who were the principal creators of human reason and reflections, philosophical and religious reasoning evolved in parallel. While in the context of the ancient religion, the elementary conception of the people who did not possess a complete perception of believing and accepting the natural events around them, and who had a belief in the existence of mysterious forces which shape and regulate the universe, then the people of philosophy have separated meaning and have analyzed them separately and then together. The famous philosopher Plato said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." These words show the necessity of applying another way of thinking to what we call the events of life. Similarly, when we can pull on memories of past successes and failures to guide current and future projects, we perform at our best. As our expertise grows, we gather a repertoire of knowledge and skills that allow us to work through problems with little conscious effort. Quality thinking doesn't just happen, it requires constant practice, focused attention, and most importantly, a personal commitment to improving our skills day in and out. While it might be tempting to believe that skills like critical thinking and information literacy are possessed inherently by intelligent people, the reality is that all abilities are built at the hands of a dedicated practitioner. When we acknowledge that critical thinking takes practice and that there is always room for improvement, we set ourselves up to adapt, learn, and develop in an ever-changing world. Think of something you know a lot about. It could be a sport, a hobby, a place, or any other topic you choose. Now imagine that you're teaching someone else about it. Whether you're explaining the rules of the game, sharing a favorite recipe, or guiding a friend through the best sites and activities at your favorite vacation spot, it would be easy to talk about your subject matter without a second thought. You've mastered the topics, so sharing what you know feels as natural as breathing. This is often the case with critical thinking. When we encounter a scenario in need of careful thought and analysis, our existing knowledge automatically works to guide that thinking process. When we're able to explain our reasoning to ourselves, we have the confidence needed to engage others through conversation and refine our thoughts in the process. Our aim is to assess whether the students will be able to gauge the share of evaluated expressions and whether they will apply the correct criteria of probability, value of information, or rhetorical craftsmanship. 1. Precision. The relativity of any attribute should be demonstrated through examination of other quasi-similar objects or properties that are manipulated. Also, through examination of other value-laden objects, such as artworks, it should become clear that value is a relative judgment, not natural attraction. 2. Circumscription. A relativizing speech should sooner or later lead to a formulation of the relative or comparative characteristics of the properties applied rather than an abstract statement of relativism itself. 3. Weighting. In cases where no clear difference between values is detectable, it should be declared that weighting is also a rhetorical technique, giving an audience a thrill for detecting or guessing an intended meaning on their own. Critical thinking requires assessment and training. For assessing critical thinking abilities, it would suffice to let students read a newspaper article, watch a TV news story, or exploit any other assignment that will require their active thinking rather than mere remembering or understanding. We will need an example of a problem with a moderately complex metaphor, a Picasso painting, to find out whether a student will be able to distinguish between such attributes as metaphorical meaning or ideological connotation. They should recognize that an expression is valued rather than arbitrary or somehow natural. They will have to renounce, at least temporarily, any partisan opinions, addressing an open question, which will require their opinion to be circumscribed to a narrow frame of disputable information and to evaluate information against criteria of probability, quality, or rhetorical artisanship, rather than color or personal favor. The tricky thing is, how can we transpose such complex and multifaceted holistic thinking to an impression that we might catch with an assignment or a rubric? Here are a few recommendations for an approximate positive feedback while evaluating students' performances. Moreover, institutions should adopt strategies to establish a culture of critical thinking. Interactions between the faculty and the students in the form of thought-provoking discussions, debates, and argumentative dialogues should be a part of teaching and learning. Students should be encouraged to participate in research or acquire new techniques to enhance their critical thinking abilities. Establishing a campus-wide culture of critical thinking requires an institutional commitment to foster critical thinking among all stakeholders across disciplines using one standardized definition of critical thinking and towards the establishment of critical thinking as an institutional learning outcome that transcends specific programs and disciplines. Fostering critical thinking within the online learning context requires a significant shift in the teaching and learning methods, forming the basis of the entire course in the online setting. It provides a roadmap to move from the passive absorption of knowledge to the collaborative creation of knowledge by prioritizing the mastery of critical thinking. We have provided several strategies faculty might find helpful in fostering critical thinking in the process of developing an online course. We suggest that once the course reaches maturity, faculty can use effective assessment practices such as discussion, communication, or demonstration to ensure that students are demonstrating critical thinking abilities in respect of intended learning outcomes. Critical thinking, when nurtured and developed, has the potential to transform individuals and society as a whole. It equips individuals with the skills and mindset necessary to analyze, evaluate, and question information and ideas from different perspectives. By cultivating critical thinking, we empower individuals to make informed decisions, solve complex problems, and engage in constructive dialogue. As we face an increasingly complex and interconnected world, the need for critical thinking has never been greater. It is an essential skill that transcends disciplinary boundaries and is applicable in all areas of life. So let us embrace the power of critical thinking and strive to nurture it in ourselves and others. Chapter 9: The Role of Critical Thinking in Society. Many colleges and universities around the world claim to ensure that students are not only equipped with necessary knowledge, but also possess essential skills such as effective communication, critical and creative thinking, as well as the ability to engage in self-directed and lifelong learning. For instance, at Texas A&M University, critical thinking is identified as one of the 7 desired undergraduate learning outcomes. Similarly, a study conducted on 80 institutions revealed that over half of them emphasized the importance of developing critical, creative, and innovative thinking in their mission statements regarding liberal education. In the professional world, employers often seek candidates with extensive job experience. A study analyzing job postings for business graduates found that more than 5 years of experience was the most commonly mentioned requirement. However, it is crucial to recognize that long-term success goes beyond mere experience. The study further emphasizes that individuals must continue to nurture their critical thinking capabilities even after 5 years in the workforce. This ongoing development ensures that their critical thinking abilities remain dynamic, creative, and adaptable to the demands and challenges they will encounter throughout their professional growth. Critical thinking is not limited to scientific calculations or technical problem solving. Harvard professors Richard G. Ketchum and Joseph T. Sadavoy approached critical thinking from a broader perspective in the context of general education. Their focus was to teach students the kind of thinking that can help navigate complex societal conflicts. Through a case study, a student workshop, and an online forum, they aimed to cultivate critical thinking skills that enable individuals to approach societal conflicts with skepticism, openness, and active engagement. While abstract thinking plays a role in this process, true societal benefit is derived when critical thinking transcends abstract concepts and becomes a practical, active, and engaged reality. The significance of critical thinking can be observed in various situations. Like muscles that grow stronger with exercise, critical thinking also becomes more robust with practice. Within higher education, critical thinking is deemed especially important for achieving the learning goals and vision of universities and colleges at both the undergraduate and graduate levels. It is not just a singular skill that one develops and moves on from. Instead, it is a lifelong journey of critically thinking about what one learns, observes, analyzes, decides, creates, manipulates, imagines, and examines. Employers, as well as society at large, value individuals who possess strong critical thinking abilities. Moreover, our educational system endeavors to impart these skills because critical thinking has become the cornerstone of an educated individual in the 21st century, shaping our words, thoughts, and decisions throughout the day, year, decade, and century. The concept of media literacy introduces a different approach to media consumption, one that challenges the traditional notion of passive consumers. Media literacy emphasizes the critical role of users in creating meaning and the potential for alternative social realities to emerge. Examining media education raises important questions about who holds the power to manipulate public opinion and consequently assumes the responsibility for it. Given the political, social, and psychological implications of media consumption, we acknowledge that the manipulation of consent is a responsibility the democratic process should shoulder. The production, centralization, and reception of media texts embody the complex relationship between dominant and subordinate ideological formations. Institutional practices shape the dynamics of media message creation, centralization, and reception, thereby influencing the formation of ideological assumptions. Unlike other forms of communication, media messages often conceal these assumptions, making them more persuasive in nature. Persuasive media messages have the ability to easily sway the opinions of users, making it relatively simpler to influence their decisions as compared to convincing them to independently arrive at their own conclusions. Consequently, media, particularly media messages, play a significant role in constructing and projecting dominant ideologies. The information age offers immense potential, but it also imposes considerable responsibilities on individuals who must evaluate the deluge of messages they receive. In order to navigate this landscape effectively, young people require education that empowers them to develop reliable forms of critical thinking specific to the evaluation of media messages. By fostering critical thinking skills in relation to media, individuals can develop subjective behavior patterns and effectively utilize information for their own benefit. Media education plays a crucial role in empowering young people to think critically about media messages, thus enabling them to make responsible decisions that shape their lives. By teaching young media users to be aware of the shorthand and biased presentation techniques employed by media messages, media education empowers them to be more discerning consumers. The concept of self-actualization has been explored in various contexts. Lee Thayer provides a specific definition of self-actualization as the reasons giving rise to design. Employing rhetoric and argument theory, one can gain a deeper understanding of statements made in relation to this concept. By continuously applying critical thinking tools, discursive objects are provided to adapt and survive in various environments, leading to new understandings of political strategy. The formation of the infinitely regressive premium self relies on the juxtaposition of these analyses, resulting in the development of a premium self through iterative application of this method. This approach involves flipping statements when the formula fails to explain the reason behind the occurrence of a discursive object based on what is stored in the discursive archive. Critical thinking discussions often intersect with political discussions. Likewise, discussions about political discourse inherently possess political implications. It is evident that political discussions concerning critical thinking, mathematics, political sciences, and other subjects are not neutral in nature. An example can be seen in the ongoing dialogue between critical thinking and politics. Both critical thinking and politics involve a certain degree of stress, and one can argue that critical thinking is, in fact, a political tool. Just as the dissenters of pre-revolutionary France engaged in continuous arguments and counter-arguments, contemporary political figures and citizens also utilize critical thinking tools to establish their presence and claim space within a given context. However, this study reveals that the value of critical thinking extends beyond political engagement. It also plays a crucial role in the actualization of self and one's strategies. As for the reasoning method employed, the study showcases the application of rhetoric and argument structure theory to analyze political discourse, with a focus on self-actualization as the next step in the exploration of critical thinking. Chapter 10. Enhancing Critical Thinking Abilities. Individual skills needed for critical thinking are endless and include discipline-specific knowledge, the ability to obtain a good set of knowledge of the discipline's models, the ability to recognize general principles which help us grasp our world, the ability to make reasonable decisions relating to the quality of the inferences one makes. There are many methods for infusing critical thinking in the various subject contents. The strategies include questioning techniques, discussions on certain specific aspects of a particular subject matter to be handled likewise, a matter of the different relationships that cause the particular subjects, collaborative learning techniques in which students work together to complete a particular academic task. The techniques perfected to further develop critical thinking skills slash a broader view abroad to receive academic and curricular virtues may be giving personal experiences, thus showing students to be more open, warm, and ready to learn. Those students who are successful, that is, those who also have greater critical thinking abilities, are the truth seekers. It was found that there is a significant positive relationship between critical thinking skills and students' academic achievements at Sefako Makitho Health Sciences University. It was discovered in this study that first-year professional students generally lack the much-needed general critical thinking abilities, and this was seen as a significant factor contributing to academic deficiencies that could be observed in the first-year students' academic performance. Some of the many skills that are part of critical thinking skills are things like stating when personal preferences are being used in the interaction, giving reasons for decisions rather than keeping them secret, making reference to evidence when getting ideas, shifting perspectives, identifying contradictions in given knowledge. One of the skills that tie in with critical thinking skills is reflexivity, the ability of individuals to recognize the role that their knowledge, experiences, and ways of understanding play in shaping reality and themselves. Curiosity is the key to learning. It is always desirable for a person to inquire about new things, taking courses, and always staying curious. Curiosity creates the habit of learning. If you don't know how to access your curiosity, the answer is quite simple. Remember your childhood. Whenever you asked questions, it was never for mere obligation, but because of a real desire to understand what was being said to you. Ever since you were born, everything has been pretty much unknown, so every question that you made was because your curiosity was active. Therefore, being curious is synonymous with learning, and to create a habit of learning, it is necessary to think for yourself. Reading, courses, and other means of acquiring knowledge are important and may help you to know the reflections of other people that you did not know before. However, if you're being dragged around by the things around you, then your mind will absorb a lot of information without truly processing them. Such a mind ends up getting lost in the distractions of life and does not see everything that happens around it. If you consider a person who is only able to solve some problems that he was taught in school, as soon as he encounters something new, he gets stuck because he has not been able to think and discover by himself. Furthermore, when he comes across a question that needs a trivial application of a known formula, sometimes he mistakenly considers it interesting, precisely because he does not need to undergo a mental effort to solve it. This sort of attitude is a sign that he stopped learning, and hence also thinking. Besides all that, one common behavior among these people is to not accept realities that are unknown to them. Instead of learning new things, they become defensive and use primitive thinking patterns to suit themselves. In this context, all they can do is repeat what they have memorized over and over again, cycle to the same thoughts on and on. It makes them believe they are really intelligent. While the presentation is generalized for anthropology education, professors from various academic areas should be freer to test it out with their own students, not only for its pure linguistic and intercultural educational elements, but also for its capacity to stimulate their students in the art of critically analyzing sets of opinions, since that alone should ultimately translate into pieces of public policy, institutional decisions, or learned behaviors of international or local magnitude, and not necessarily within one particular regional circle. That has been the American secret and the philosophical rationale for the oligarchic growth of its political economic establishment over the last 2 centuries. But the Hispanic certification, given its weight during the last 10 years, will now require North Americans to seek world citizens that are intellectually responsive at an ever increasing rate for the good of everyone, everywhere. As critical enthusiasts of public debates in general, and as anthropology public lecturers and instructors in particular, we have developed a single class activity that emphasizes those American learning needs related to the fostering of operative critical thinking cultures. We have dubbed this teaching material the Do It in Public Writing Assignment Model. In sum, the Do It in Public Writing Assignment Model seeks to encourage anthropology students to present their research or opinions on controversial topics by using as many languages as they can, in order to reach a broadly variegated and geographically diverse pool of friends, family, and contacts. The fact that instead of one, this type of individual assignment demands proficiency in 2 or more languages presents as a valid coaching forum strategy through which legal, economic, political merges, as well as scientific late American ethnocentric tendencies may be successfully challenged. It is important, in this point, to highlight that what I suggest is not just promoting the idea for one of the major world languages, namely English, to become the global lingua franca of the 21st century world, but instead it is to stress the importance for North American students, who are by default native speakers of English, to make and understand the ever-present and direct connections between problems, ideas, solutions, cultures, peoples, lifestyles, economies, etc., from multiple locations on the planet. This is absolutely crucial because, as pointed out by Bialystock, Gramling, S. et al., the human brain, and particularly the bilingual or multilingual brains among us, work as perfect tools for interpreting any aspect of the universe via a multitude of interrelated paradigms. Participating in intellectual debates is required to develop critical thinking. Without exposure to alternative perspectives, beliefs, and points of view, students might never develop the capacity to examine their deepest beliefs or become aware of their uniqueness or legitimacy. The reality is that, in the globalized world of today, no solution to any problem is going to be purely national or regional, but instead it necessarily must be comprehensive, holistic, multilateral, and international. As such, it is increasingly important for students to develop the capacity to engage in debates at an intense intellectual level across difference. Another powerful way in which reflective thinking enriches your personal life is in your ability to understand other people. One who has been to the bottom of himself will understand the progression that a thought undertakes before he reaches a conclusion. Generally, people do not just conclude their beliefs based on their subconscious thought process. When our brains come across a piece of information by itself, it is not ready to make big conclusions from that single unit of experience. Even ideas we form from the very cornerstones of our existence are not simply there with no thought spent on them. They are the synthesis of countless hours of classically pointless thought that we have had. Yet we respond to others' conclusions and decisions with immediate criticism. Many of us do not take into account this mental chain that we have traveled. Therefore, through reflective culture, your understanding of others' thought evolves. So, reflective thought reminds us of our humanity. The reflective way of being involves, in effect, an ongoing silent resynthesis of anything brought within one's understanding. The reflective thinker seeks to discover the most valuable mistake he or she can make. That is, to expose assumptions beneath his or her own as well as others' ways of thinking and acting, to embrace intellectual as well as emotional doubts, and to contemplate the meaningfulness of tactical action. A reflective mind does not lead to rigid conclusions. So why is it important to cultivate this deep cultural form of intellectual worth? One reason is for taking control of your life. Passionate people engage uncritically in relatively thoughtless activities. By examining your personal set of values and beliefs, looking for contradictions, you will discover that there is more than surface thought that exists. Awareness that you can be snatched into those beliefs brings inner peace. This self-control empowers your life because of the power that you have discovered in your own thought. Reflective thinking is both logical and intuitive. Although it necessarily employs reason and evidence, it embraces and transcends them. The acquisition and utilization of most other intellectual skills leave a person at the surface of experience, resulting in a certain class of conclusions and beliefs. Reflective thinking, on the other hand, embraces contradiction, rejects surface appearances, and involves intuition and contemplation. The reflective thinker works over his or her emotions and experiences, beliefs, and values. The emotional, psychological, and spiritual elements of subjective experience play as important a role in reflective thought as do the objective and the empirical. The resonant search for meaning can unearth as much about the thoughtful person as can an independent investigation of one's responses to experience. If you found this content enriching and valuable, we would be deeply grateful if you could express your appreciation through liking and subscribing. Your support is incredibly meaningful and enables us to continue creating content that resonates with you. For those who think this is a great gift for yourself or for your loved ones, you can find the link in the description.